Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Planning and Highways Board. I'll hand you over to Abby for the housekeeping arrangements.
Thank you, Chair. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, please take instruction from the staff and stewards, then the assembly point is Tudor Square. Please can I request everyone to switch mobile devices to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. The meeting today will be webcast and the recording will also be available for people to view later through the Council's website. While ever the meeting is open to the public, photography, video and sound recording of the proceedings is permitted. However, the Chair has discretion to withdraw or suspend this permission, for example, if the recording is disrupting the conduct of the meeting or is being undertaken in a manner which could capture personal information, or in the event that a member of the public participating in a meeting objects to be recorded. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. And can I just reiterate that request to turn mobile phones to silent or off? We have a tradition that there's a £5 fine for any interruption to the Lord Mayor's charity. Item 2, what I will do is go around the room, but I think this item will merge into item 2 as well. So I'm going to start with Councillor Price and go around the room, ask each member to introduce themselves for the benefit of those who are viewing this on the webcam. So Pete.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Peter Price, Member for Shire Green Brightside.
Councillor Tony Dams, Councillor for Southey.
Mike.
Councillor Mike Chaplin, also for Southey Ward.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Brian Holmshaw, Councillor for Bromhill and Sharrow Vale.
Councillor Tony Downing, Councillor for Mosborough Ward.
I'm going to start on the back row across there so we can end with Alan. So Barbara.
Councillor Barbara Masters, Councillor for the Ecological Ward.
Richard.
Richard Williams, Councillor for Stannington Ward.
Councillor Gary Weatherall for Shire Green Brightside Ward.
Roger Davison, Councillor for Ecological Ward.
Bob.
Councillor Bob McCann, Councillor for Brayton Ward.
Councillor I. Woodcock, Councillor for East Ecclesfield Ward.
And that nicely leads us into item 2 of the on the agenda, to note the appointments of the co-chairs of the Planning and Highways Committee. I've been reinstated as a co-chair of this committee, and we have Alan Woodcock, who's my other co-chair, who will be taking it turn and turn about and working together on strategic items. Okay. Abby, do we have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies for absence from Councillor Basharat, and his substitute is Councillor Tony Downing, and we've also had apologies from Councillor Wilson.
Okay, thank you. Items for the exclusion of the public and press. I don't believe that there were any such items on the agenda. Is that correct? Yeah, okay, thank you. Declarations of interest. Does any member have any declaration to make? Councillor Downing.
Yeah, being a councillor for Mosborough Ward, item 10 on the agenda, but I've had no input with anyone in the ward over it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Holmshaw.
Yeah, simply to say that the tree preservation order on Hardwick Crescent is in my ward, but I've had no representations on that.
Abby, you want to? Sorry, just to be clear, and for the minutes, the item that Councillor Downing is declaring an interest on is the High Street Mosborough application. Yeah, that's correct. Any other declarations of interest? No, right, okay. Minutes of the previous meeting. I will go through them page by page for any matters of accuracy or any matters arising. They start in the agenda pack on page 9. Page 9. Page 10. And page 11. So there are no matters arising, and I'll take those as an accurate record. Thank you. Site visits, all members should have site... Oh, sorry, Councillor Humshaw.
All it is, one tiny thing, right at the end it says the date of the next meeting, which is incorrect because it was cancelled.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was cancelled because of its proximity to the election. Right, okay, site visits. All members should have the date of the site visits. Abby sends out a standing invitation, which is the Monday before the next planning agenda, planned planning meeting. That's a sentence to get your head around. If there are no items that officers think it would benefit us to visit, then that will be cancelled. Otherwise, Abby will confirm that in the week leading up to the meeting. So, the first item on the agenda to discuss is Tree Preservation Order number 447, and that's at 45A Brooklands Avenue, Sheffield S10 4GB. I'm going to hand over to officers to present this report.
Good afternoon, my name is Vanessa Lyons, I'm the Community Tree Officer with Sheffield City Council. So I'm here to seek confirmation of TPO 447, which is at 45 Brooklands Avenue. Just before I start, it should be noted in the accompanying report that it stated that an objection has been received for TPO 447, but that's actually incorrect. It was a representation in support of the TPO that was received. And the TPO is also referred to once as TPO 445 again. That's a typo, so apologies for that. It's TPO 447. The TPO was made on the 6th of January to protect a pine, silver birch, a sycamore and a group of sycamores at the above address. These trees are predominantly within the curtilage of 45A Brooklands Avenue, although some of the row of sycamores are actually within gardens that abut that site on Whitfield Road. In November 2021, the site was cleared of many of the trees there, I think potentially to prepare the site for development. And in response to this, I was asked to look at the remaining trees to assess whether they'd be worthy of protection under a TPO, to prevent the loss of any more of the trees and also ensure that they'd be considered during any subsequent planning application. A tempo assessment was carried out and this provided a clear recommendation for protection. A summary of the tempo can be found in Appendix B. Of the trees, the pine is probably the most visually prominent from the road. It's outwardly free of major defects and brings a good degree of amenity to the area. The silver birch and sycamore are less visibly prominent from the highway, but do form a natural screen between adjacent houses and the proposed development site. G1 is perhaps the most sort of important group of trees on the site in that it creates a really large screen between the houses on Whitfield Road and the site at 45A Brooklands. No objections were received to the TPO. A representation was received from residents whose land borders the site, querying the position of several trees which are included in the TPO and highlighting that they are in fact within their gardens in Whitfield Road. The border there is very unclear, so it was good to know that they actually belong to the neighbours. And within the representation, they stated that they were supportive of the TPO and did not wish to object.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa. Does any member have any questions? Councillor Weatherall.
Yeah, thanks for this, Chair. On page 21, on agenda item 9, anyway, you've got tempo and it says it's attached, and you said B. Can you just tell me where that is?
Sorry, I can't hear. Could you repeat that, sorry?
Yeah, on page 21, you've got tempo assessment attached, and you said B in your summing up. Can you tell me where it is?
I think it should be within Appendix B.
Gary, if I can come in here, I think you're looking at the next item. we're dealing with item 8 here. And so the tree evaluation method for preservation orders, the tempo, is on page 19 for this one. Okay. Do we have any other questions? Okay, any comments? Right, in that case, I propose we move straight to the vote, and I'll go around the room asking you to indicate whether, well, no, actually, I'll do it as a show of hands on this, it's clear enough. We're going to ask you if you will confirm the officer recommendation to confirm the tree preservation officer. All those in favour, please show. And that looks as if it's carried. Abby? Yeah, okay, thank you. And we're back to Vanessa now, because we are moving, in fact, on to item 9 now. And this is to seek the confirmation of a preservation order number 448 at 6 Hardwick Crescent, S11 8WB. Vanessa.
Thank you. So, TPO 448 was made in result of a planning application which was submitted to demolish the garage and outbuildings adjacent to number 6 and erect a dwelling house with associated landscape and parking. While the proposal didn't call for the removal of the trees which are on that site, planning officers raised concerns as to how the development would be realised without causing root damage, as the majority of the trees' roots will be in the area proposed for development. The proximity of the proposed delling to the trees would also create, we thought, consistent conflict with regards branch encroachment, excessive shade, seasonal debris and the fall of sap from aphids, which favour the trees that are on the site, those being 4 sycamore and 1 lime. These issues would make the proposed development unpleasant to live in and would likely result in pressure for the trees to be pruned or removed in the future. Again, a tree evaluation method for preservation orders was carried out. The trees scored at 14 points respectively, which provided a clear recommendation for protection. The trees themselves have got really high public visibility because they form a linear group of mature trees on the corner of Hardwick Road and Salter Lane. So in this respect, the trees are very suitable for their setting. They form a natural screen along a busy road and they add to the leafy character of the Nether Edge Conservation Area. As such, it's considered that the trees bring a high degree of amenity to the area and their preservation should be sought. There is one objection to this TPO which was received via email, and it regards the blocking of light from the trees to a neighbouring property. And the objector requested that the TPO be amended to permit pruning to a height that would allow more light into said property. This objection was responded to by the council's legal team, stating that application to prune TPO trees should be pursued via the application process. And admin for the environmental planning team also then followed with a reply giving guidance on how to submit an application, but no application has since been received.
Thank you, Vanessa. Can I ask you to just hit the microphone? That's it, thank you. Do I have any members' questions? Councillor Chaplin.
Thank you, Chair. On this preservation order, the trees are covered in ivy. My understanding of ivy is that it's parasitic and could over years shorten the life of the tree it's feeding off. Is that of any significance here?
The presence of ivy is not something I'd be overly concerned about. It doesn't really feed off the tree, more use the tree for support. So over a long period of time, if it's allowed to remain, it can kind of crowd out some foliage within the canopy. I actually think the ivy on these trees may have been removed because I drove past them the other day and they looked quite different. However, it would not be something that I'd be concerned about with regards to their long-term retention.
Councillor Downing?
Yeah, thank you for that. Would not the ivy actually eat into the bark and therefore damage the bark and let disease in? Is that a question?
Vanessa?
Again, I don't really think that the ivy would detract from the long-term health of the tree. It grows from the ground and uses the bark as support, so it can sort of make an indentation into the bark over time. But in my experience, removing ivy, if it's done carefully, doesn't really negatively impact on the health of the tree. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Do I have any member comments? In that case, I propose to move to the vote, and the recommendation is to seek confirmation of the tree preservation order number 448. And again, I'll do it by show of hands. All those in favour? And I believe that's unanimous, Abby. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. So now we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is applications under various acts and regulations. And application 10A is the first of three applications to hear today, and it's application 21/04262/FUL, land associated with Inkfield House, 11 Bocking Hill, Sheffield, S36. And the first thing is we go over to the officer to hear the presentation of the report. Dinah, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. The application site is outlined here in red, and it lies in a designated housing area at the junction of Broomfield Road and Bocking Hill in Stocksbridge. Next slide, please. The site originally formed the garden to Inkfield House. That's a currently vacant detached stone property just to the west of the site, slightly obscured by trees on this aerial shot. It's surrounded by housing to the north and the east and the west, and there's a small area of open space known as Watson House Green to the west and a sports ground on much higher land to the south. Broomfield Road to the south of the site is a one-way road. It's running from east to west. There's a Lister barn just beyond the eastern site boundary. The site slopes down from south to north, and there are two watercourses across the site, and both of those will need to be diverted if planning permission is granted for the scheme before you today. And it should also be noted that the site has actually been cleared of trees and vegetation in the recent past, so this aerial shot is a little bit out of date. Thank you. On these slides, we've got the top left-hand side, we've got a view across Watson House Green. It's the area of open space just to the southwest, looking towards the corner of Broomfield Road and Bocking Hill. You can just see Inkfield House to the left of that top left-hand photograph. Top right is a view along Broomfield Road, the Broomfield Road frontage, looking towards existing terraced housing at numbers 1 to 5. The stone wall that bounds the site will be retained, other than in places where we're granting new access. Bottom left, you can see, looking from Broomfield Road, you can see Inkfield House to the left, and then that's another view from Broomfield Road looking sort of the northeast across the site. Next slide, please. These shots are looking towards the gable end of the listed barn, which sits adjacent to the site to the east. It's on higher ground. It's within the curtilage of a neighbouring property and sits at the end of a cul-de-sac of relatively modern houses. Next slide, please. Top left is the rear elevation of the terraced houses, existing terraced houses at number 1 to 5 Broomfield Road. Rear elevation of 17 Broomfield Court. I believe that's to the east of the terraces. Bottom two photographs are looking towards the north at the rear of properties on Lee Avenue. And again, left-hand side, another photograph looking at properties on Lee Avenue, most of which are on a much lower land level. And then the photograph on the right is quite a good one. That's standing at the eastern end of the site, looking back at Ingfield House. Thank you. And then these are two photographs looking at number 15 Bocking Hill, which is the new house that's been built just to the north of Ingfield House. I say new, it was a decade or so ago. Members may recall that outline planning permission was granted for 9 houses in August 2020. At that time, access from Broomfield Road was approved and all other matters were reserved for subsequent approval. Full planning permission is now sought for 14 houses, with access again taken from Broomfield Road in a very similar location. The proposed scheme is slightly denser and it has a contemporary feel. There are the 3 properties that you can see there fronting onto Broomfield Road, and the 2 either side of the new access road will be finished in natural stone to reflect the character of the existing properties, in particular the terrace to the southeast and Ingfield House. Houses within the site will be finished in a similar toned buff brick and render. Each house has at least 2 off-street parking spaces, though some have 3, and there are 3 visitor parking spaces just at the bend in the access road. Gardens are acceptable in size, they meet with our supplementary planning guidance, and they're also supplemented by enclosed rooftop terraces. And it's considered that a single-storey garage block at the eastern end of the access road, I think you can see just to the north of the terrace properties, will not harm the setting of the listed barn, which, as I showed you before, sits on a higher land level. This is the street scene along Broomfield Road. You can see the existing terrace to the right, the 3 detached properties fronting Broomfield Road, and then on the left, the 2 properties either side of the new access road. Next slide, thank you. At the bottom of the screen, this is a site section looking north from the proposed access road. So that's an internal elevation looking of houses facing onto the access road. Thank you. This is the partial section looking south from the access road. You can see the listed barn and the existing terraced houses stood on the left-hand side, and in front of the terraced houses you can see the single-storey garage block, as I say, at a much lower level, and separated from the listed barn by some landscaping. We're content that the development won't have a harmful effect on the listed barn, which is in a poor state of repair, as we saw on site yesterday, but is also compromised to a degree already by the modern housing development to the eastern side of that. This is an example of one of the house types, the house type that will front onto Broomfield Road. You can perhaps just about make out the second floor roof, enclosed roof terrace. As you look on the elevations, it's that element with the flat parapet around it. So you won't see that from ground level. Thank you. This is a slightly larger house type, again with an enclosed second floor roof terrace. This is an artist's impression looking east along the access road. Next slide, please. Another looking towards Broomfield Road and the entrance to the site from Watson House Green. This one is looking west along Broomfield Road with the 3 stone detached properties in the foreground and the retained stone wall. And then this is looking, west along the access road at the properties, and you can just see Ingfield House in the background there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dana. I don't have any speakers indicated for this application, so I'll open it up to members. I've got an indication from the back of the room. Hang on just a second. Have we got? Sorry about that. Hang on just a second. Slight administrative glitch. Okay, yeah, sorry about that. Mr. Vincent? Yeah, okay. If you'd like to come forward to one of the desks with the speakers available to you, Claire's going to come and make sure that the microphone is logged in. Who wants to speak? That's fine. So, Mr. Vincent, the floor is yours for up to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, all. I'm Tom Vincent from Urbana, and I speak as the planning agent in support of the application today. First and foremost, as noted in the officer's report, as of April 2021, and in relation to the local housing need figures at that date, taking account of the 35% urban centres uplift, Sheffield can only demonstrate a 4-year deliverable supply of housing land. Due to this lack of 5-year supply, both the relevant policies for determining applications that include housing are considered to be out of date, whilst placing considerable positive weight onto the proposals of this application. 2 rounds of neighbour notification have taken place due to the extent of the revisions of the scheme. All of the issues raised in these representations, as discussed in the officer's reports, have been dealt with within the application. In regards to any outstanding concerns, the proposals do not trigger the policy requirement for affordable housing, and it is asserted that the lack of housing mix is outweighed by offering high-quality homes to the existing housing stock. Fundamentally, the site lies within a housing area, as defined in the Sheffield Unitary Development Plan, in which policy H10 identifies residential use as a preferred land use in these areas. Similarly, the site is located in a sustainable location for housing development, as defined by Core Strategy Policy CS23, which identifies the urban area of Stocksbridge as an area for new housing. Paragraph 96 of the MPPF states that small and medium-sized sites can make a vital contribution to meeting the housing requirements for local authority. To assist in the Council's ambitions to bolster their lack of housing land supply to where the figure needs to be, authorities should support the development of these windfall sites through planning decisions, giving weight to proposals such as this one, which provides a healthy and optimum supply of homes for the site. The proposed number of 14 plots with the orientation and the siting as demonstrated in the proposed plans allows for a density of 33 dwellings per hectare, which meets the requirements of Core Strategy Policy CS26. All rear gardens meet the required sizes as per local guidance, and separation distances between all plots and existing plots adjacent to the site have been carefully considered and should be deemed acceptable. In terms of design and heritage implications, the plots that front Broomfield Road have been designed with contemporary details, but with traditional form that respects and conserves the established street scene in the area. Plots 1 and 14 either side of the access road present a traditional form to Broomfield Road, finished with natural stone, as per the predominant material of the local context. Screened roof terraces are proposed and carefully designed as to not cause any overlooking concerns. These roof terraces exhibit the high quality nature of the proposed dwellings. The visual impact of the development is therefore acceptable. Similarly, the proposals give Ingfield House a greater presence within the street scene and would therefore not detrimentally affect this heritage asset. The site is located in proximity to a Grade 2 listed barn at Broomfield Court. The scheme has limited impact on the setting of the listed building, given it will sit on a lower level with some landscaping between, and officers are satisfied that an adequate buffer zone provided will be acceptable. Considerable negotiations and amendments have been made within the application to make absolutely sure that the amenity space for both existing and future occupiers is acceptable. The proposed 1.8 parapet walls enclosing the roof terrace means no overlooking concerns arise. The orientation of the plots have been designed in a way as to avoid any overlooking, overbearing or overshadowing concerns within the development. The proposed access to the site is of adequate width and the configurations to be policy compliant with two-way traffic requirements, whilst maintaining the one-way routing traffic on Broomfield Road. Given the location of the site and the amount of parking proposed, highways officers are satisfied that the development would not result in unacceptable highway safety implications. As well as acceptable garden sizes, level changes across the site have been taken into account, with the retaining structures incorporated where necessary and executed with appropriate materials and planting. In summary, the scheme delivers 14 high-quality residential units that would boost the city's housing stock and appropriate density and within a well-established residential area. It is a clear beneficial use of the site in which the design, orientation and separation distances of the plots have gone through rigorous negotiations and careful consideration. In the absence of a 5-year land supply, these proposals are deemed acceptable. We are therefore grateful for the officer's recommendation to approve, and we kindly request that this carried by members today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Vincent. Thank you. I will now open the floor up to members' questions, and I had Councillor Davison indicating.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I wasn't able to go yesterday because I had a licensing meeting, but I was there for the original visit, which was for outline planning. Now, at that time, as you say, it was outline the planner was saying that there was outline planning for 9 houses, and now or 9 dwellings, and now this is increased to 14. What has changed, and what effect might that have on any wildlife that is in that area? Thank you. That's the first question.
Dinah?
Thank you, Chair. What's changed is that the applicant has proposed a scheme that has 5 more houses, slightly smaller footprints to each unit, slightly smaller unit sizes. In terms of the impact on wildlife, when we visited the site yesterday, you could see, and you can see in the photographs, that the site has been largely cleared. It doesn't have, it has moderate, or well, no, it doesn't have very much biodiversity value at the moment. It's not a habitat for any particular species. So I think there'll be very little change in terms of impact on wildlife from this scheme in comparison to the previously approved outline scheme.
Chair, thank you very much. It's concerned with condition 26. There should be no piped discharge of surface water from the development before the completion of surface water drainage works. Now, of course, this is on a very steep hill, as all Stocksbridge is. Most of the housing is on a hill. So this is bound to affect any surface running water. So how are we going to cope with the problems that this will bring? Except that all the surface will be permeable.
Diana, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. We also, there will be a lot of permeable surfaces, there will be garden areas and landscaping, and then we've also got a series of conditions that will that require the submission of details to deal with, for the lifetime of the development, to deal with surface water drainage and the diversion of the 2 watercourses that run across the site. The developer is well aware that this site is, and we are, that this site is prone to surface water flow. But we're satisfied, as is the LLFA, sorry, the Lead Local Flood Authority, that can be controlled by suitable methods that are to be agreed by condition.
Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I've also got Councillor Brian Holmshaw. Brian.
Right. Thank you, Chair. I've got 5 sections here. So, with your permission, I would like to run through them. They are...
Go for it.
Thank you. So, taking from the officer's report, each unit has an acceptable sized garden. This is directly from the officer's report. Although a number of plots fall short of the 10 metres usually sought. So one of the things that is asked for then is that permitted development rights across the development are removed in future. So my question specifically to do with this is, what are the implications of doing this? And can you clarify what exactly this is intended to avoid? So that's the first question. Secondly, as we were going through the slides, it was mentioned about the water courses. I mean, ideally, in my mind, you adapt your housing around a water course rather than divert it. What plans are there to divert them, and what improvements can be made when these water courses are altered? Question number 2. Question number 3, there is an indicative landscape and planting strategy, which it is mentioned within the report that this is going to be, that it is acceptable in principle and will be secured via condition. So is it going to be secured via condition? So I didn't spot the condition in there, but that might just be me not spotting it. Number 4, there was a preliminary ecological appraisal. An ecological enhancement is recommended. In what form would that take? And can this be done by condition? And finally, it just came to mind to me that actually the green area across the road is highly suitable for going for youngsters, for families to go over and have a kick around and have a picnic if their gardens aren't quite big enough. So what facilities are being put in place to enable them to cross the road safely to use that green space? That's it, thanks.
Oh, okay, thank you. Brian, can I ask you to turn your mic off? Thank you. Right, so we have got a series of 5 questions. I don't know if you want to answer them in the order that they've been asked, Dinah, or if you'd like Councillor Humshaw just to run through the headlines of them again. Are you okay?
I think I've got them. I'll try.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. The first question was about the size of the gardens. Could we go back to the site plan, please? Just have a look at those. Thank you. Oh, that's one. Thanks. All the gardens have the required minimum of 50 square metres, but the shape of some of the gardens means that some of them fall slightly short of 10 metres deep. Those on the western end of the north side of the access road, those the ones that back onto the northern site boundary, but at the western end, I think they fall slightly short of 10 metres, and I think the properties fronting Broomfield Road, again, they're wider than they are long. So they've got the amount of area, but not necessarily the depth. So what does that mean? It means that in some circumstances that could result in privacy issues where you have properties in close proximity, but you'll see here, particularly with those to the north, the properties on Lee Avenue to the north are over 29 metres away and at a lower level. So the slightly short gardens in this case don't raise any privacy issues. But what we've done is remove PD, permitted development, so that means that you can build quite a large single-storey extension, rear extension under permitted development rights, and we don't want that to erode the garden space to a degree that we would consider to be unacceptable. So removing PD removes the ability to build a big extension and lose most of the garden. In terms of the watercourses, there's been a lot of discussion about the watercourses with both Yorkshire Water and the lead local flood authority. Condition 3 is the condition that seeks initially it seeks further investigation of those watercourses, but then also details on how it's going to be diverted. And that's an agreed approach with the lead local flood authority. Landscaping and planting strategy, I think that's condition 18. So we have a strategy, we have a plan, and that plan involves additional tree planting. There are some sort of communal garden in the planted areas. But we are seeking further details, including which will include comprehensive detail of hard and soft landscaping. So that will include the full range of planting, etc. Condition 18. Ecological enhancement. I didn't quite have time to find out which. The condition is basically that I can't remember the number. The development carried out in accordance with the recommendations of the preliminary ecological appraisal, which will result in a small net gain in biodiversity. And I know that the features that form part of that are habitat boxes. We've got the hedgehog highways. I think there's sensitive lighting strategy in there, a flowering lawn mix, and then the additional tree planting as part of the landscape strategy. And I think the final question was about is there a need to have a crossing across the road? it's a one-way street. It's very quiet. It's not very heavily trafficked. You only have to look in one direction in order to be able to cross the road safely. So we don't think there's any need for any additional highway improvements. Thank you.
Does that answer your questions, Brian?
I think the only one I'm a little uncertain on is the improvement to the watercourses, whether there will be any actual improvement, for example, to aid wildlife, etc. That's not part of the condition.
That's not part of the condition. The condition is seeking the diversion of the watercourse. Rather, it doesn't seek any improvements.
Thank you. The next question I have indicating is Councillor Mike Chaplin. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to Councillor Holmeshaw for the last 5 questions, which saves me some airtime. So I want to come back to the original decision to agree to outline planning permission for 9 houses. I'd like to know what view the planning committee took at the time as to why they set that number at 9. Surely they would have felt that 9 was plenty, for want of a better way to put that. Because it does seem to me that we are trying to cram 5 more homes onto this fairly modest plot. And I do have one other question, and that's the plot wedge to the southeast down the bottom. What's the what purpose will that have or function?
Thank you, Councillor.
Chair.
Dinah, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The council didn't ask for 9 homes when permission was granted. That was the number that was proposed by the applicant at that time. In terms of the increase to 14, again, we're assessing the application that's before us. There's a very strong steer in the MPPF, I think it's paragraph 125, that says we should avoid development at low densities. We should be making efficient use of land, housing land. This is land that's allocated for housing in the unitary development plan. And as the report explains, in terms of amenities and sort of overdevelopment, we're quite satisfied that this complies with all the supplementary planning guidance in terms of garden sizes and distances, etc. So it's not an overdevelopment of the site.
Is that okay, Councillor?
To the bottom, to the southeast, which doesn't seem to be allocated, unless I've misunderstood the plan.
So if we go back to the site plan again, do you mean the green wedge? At the sort of, southeast end. That is immediately adjacent to the listed building. So that's sort of just giving some breathing room, a landscaped area giving some breathing room to the listed building.
Okay, that's super. And I've got Councillor Richard Williams. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Could you go to slide 19, please? And this is really a question for the Highways Officer. It's 19, that's it, that's the one. Are you comfortable with the exit points for those driveways? Because to me, they look as if they could be blind, straight onto a pavement, and I'm just concerned that there's a potential hazard there.
And would you like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we are comfortable with them. We've looked at them in terms of highway safety, and we're comfortable that they are appropriate. Thank you, Chair.
That okay? Right. I can see no more indications of members with questions. Member comments. Councillor Weatherall.
Thank you, Chair. When I was on site, and read this report for the last few years, I've just got to say, well done to officers for a detailed report and to answering all questions. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you again, Chair. Yeah, I share Councillor Chaplin's concern about overdevelopment. I hear what the officers have said, but if you look at slide 17, it looks pretty congested to me. And is it another case of maybe trying to squeeze too much into a site? When we went on the site yesterday, as we approached it, I thought they can't possibly have 14 houses on this. But then, to be fair, the site did open up. But I still feel I'm uncomfortable with the amount of bricks on this particular development.
Thank you. Councillor Price.
Yes, Chair. I was on the original one when Roger looked at it, and 9 was the original request. It's a pretty good site, and it's been screaming out for development for a while. And while I would have preferred 9, I don't think 14 is going to make a great deal of difference. The gardens are quite reasonably in size. I can't think of a single planning grounds for refusing this. We'd get kicked into touch straight away, in my view. Compared to many other estates, this is a well planned and looks quite attractive, and I think it'll be very popular, Chair, so I'm going to support the officer recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Pete. Any more comments? Right, in that case then, I intend to move to the vote. The recommendation from planners is to grant conditionally. So I'll go around the room again, asking members to indicate whether they're in favour, against or abstain. And I'll start at the back with Councillor Downing.
For.
Councillor Holmeshaw.
I'm voting for this application.
Councillor Chaplin.
For the application.
Councillor Dams.
For the application.
Councillor Price.
For.
Councillor Masters.
For.
Councillor Williams.
For, Chair.
Councillor Weatherall.
For, Chair.
Councillor Davison.
For the officer recommendation.
Councillor McCann.
For, Chair.
And
For, Chair.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to speak. You get just pressing on and off and on and off, and at the end of it, you don't know whether you've got your microphone on or off. So that is unanimous. Thank you for that, Abby. And now we're proceeding to the second planning item on the agenda, item 10B, which starts on page 69, and it's a full planning application for the demolition of existing building and erection of drive-through coffee outlet with associated works and landscaping. And the location of the application is land with existing buildings on 443 to 447 Queen's Road at Highfield, S2 4DR. And Chris is the officer with this application, so over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. If we could move to the first slide, please. Okay, thank you. So, members can see the site in terms of its location there. It's on Queen's Road, bounded by River Sheaf to the east. It contains a current vacant building previously used as a scaffolding supply business until the autumn. They've now relocated elsewhere. So the proposal is for, the site's within a fringe industry and business area in terms of the UDP. The proposal is for a drive-through Costa Coffee with a new access, a building centrally within the site and other facilities around it. If you wouldn't mind moving to the site layout, please. On this slide you can see the course of the river, vegetation along it. You can also see Travis Perkins, the builder's yard to the south, and a row of terraced houses running parallel to and immediately adjacent to Queen's Road, immediately to the southwest of the site. So if you move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so these are the photographs. There's a run of photographs here. These show the site looking back towards the city. Queen's Road, you'll see there's a vegetated frontage there. The next slide, please. That's looking back in the opposite direction. Just in the left-hand corner, you can see the river bridge and the coping stones on top of that. And the sort of terracotta-coloured building in the centre is the building which is on the site at the moment to be demolished. Next one along, please. And that's a better view of that building and the current access into the site, which is being relocated to the north, which is to the west of to the left-hand side, sorry, of that picture. Next slide, please. Internally within the site, that's the existing car park, and you can see there's some kind of landscaping that would have been planted around the edge of the car park, and some trees, some of which will be naturally set adjacent to the river. The next slide, please. That's the existing building. You can see it's of no merit of itself, and that is to be demolished. Next one, please. Another view of the same building. And again, please. These are the terraced houses, and in the distance you can see Big Yellow, which some members will be familiar with. And the terraced houses there, they're 2 stories, you can see, and they run right up to the very edge of the site with a small gap in between. Next slide, please. You can see there the gap in between the terraced properties, and that gap is actually it's a part of a piece of walkway that was put in on the site for when the Travis Perkins scheme was dealt with as a planning application. It actually currently doesn't go anywhere because it's blocked off with fencing at the end, but it's important just to note that. The next slide, please. That's another image along Queen's Road, nothing of particular significance there. And again, sorry, there are more pictures than I thought there were here. That's again the gap between the buildings, and a better view of that, so that you can get down to the bottom of there, but then there is that particular piece of fencing, and you can see it's overgrown beyond that, not currently maintained. Next one, please. That's the Big Yellow building in the corner there, and the final slide, I think, is a view looking up between houses that front Myrtle Road, which are the grey render buildings, cream render buildings, and the Big Yellow facility on the left. The next slide should be oh, sorry, there are more. This is up Myrtle Road, adjacent to the bridge, and I'll explain why that's there shortly. And if you just move on, please, to the drawings. Thank you. So that layout shows the position of the building within the site, a new access created at the northern tip. The red line is actually cut off ever so slightly from that image. You can see where there's an area of vegetation either side of a footway that continues to the north up to the bridge abutment at the river. You can see here that there's a loop. It's a drive-through facility. The vehicles come in at the top end. Some will park, some will come through and order their drinks, snacks, whatever, at the serving point, and then be back out on the way using that loop road. There are 20 parking spaces within the scheme. 2 of those are for disabled persons, 2 are electric vehicle. There's cycle parking too. And as you can see on the right-hand side, adjacent to the river, a proposed walkway. That wasn't in the original scheme, and that prompted a significant number of objections, including from local interest groups, including the Sheaf and Porter Trust, and others. That resulted in an amended scheme being introduced, which is the one you see now, which does include the walk. It's approximately 2.3 metres wide, 2.4 metres wide throughout its length, with some bits ever so slightly wider. That we re-notified again, give both publicity to the application following receipt of that. And there was far fewer objection, but there was still comments received from the Trust and a couple of individuals around items of detail, plus confirming a desire to see the route adopted. The use is acceptable in land use policy terms within the fringe business area. It is in a flood risk zone, but a flood risk assessment has been submitted that confirms that levels can be achieved by the building which are acceptable for the site and don't result in flood risk. The design, if you move on please to the next slide, the design is a fairly typical drive-through facility. You'll have seen lots of them across the city and the country. It's render, cedar clad, metal cladding and glazing are the main materials. We feel that's acceptable on this site. The living conditions of the neighbours nearby was a potential issue, but we feel that's protected by hours of use conditions and the likely low level activity later into the evening. The access is acceptable in highway terms. The car park layout, if you wouldn't mind going back please to the car park layout, I'll just explain something that's in the report. So as vehicles enter the site, there are parking spaces on the left. I couldn't tell you exactly which ones, but some of them are required to be free of parked vehicles to allow the servicing to work. Whilst that seems a kind of a slightly risky approach, it is a common approach on a number of sites around the city, particularly things like some of the smaller supermarkets, and we require through conditions, and we've done so here, a service delivery management plan. The owners know when the deliveries are coming and they can ensure that those spaces are empty, coned off, whatever they decide to use, such that the servicing can function. The walkway will provide open access to the riverside and the potential for linkage to existing sections that are already in place in the future. The reason I wanted to identify on those photographs the gap between the two buildings is you can just see that at the bottom of that image. The grey shaded properties on the kind of bottom left hand corner are the residential properties, and the gap, the white area, is the link that you saw with the section of fencing at the end. That is the start of a section of walkway that was put in for Travis Perkin, for the Travis Perkins scheme, with a view to achieving a link in a chain for the Riverside Walk to be completed. This bit would be a further section and provides the opportunity to therefore link those two, along with the section that is also in place behind Big Yellow. The reason I've shown you the slide which showed the gap between Big Yellow and the housing is that we're aware from correspondence from the Trust, the Sheep and Porter Trust, that there are negotiations taking place to continue that link and bring it out onto Queen's Road at some point in the future. The restricted width in the walkway reflects the balance of the scheme viability and available land, given the dimension of the site. In an ideal situation, it would have been wider and cater more easily for cyclists, for instance. But what we have is the limit of what we feel is achievable on the site. There is some tree loss, as you'll have seen from the photographs. There's quite a bit of vegetation at the moment. There's opportunity for a good number of that to be retained in the top corner, and that will come out through the landscape scheme that we've conditioned, along with some opportunities elsewhere within the site for pockets of vegetation. There has been a preliminary ecology appraisal which identified no notable priority habitats. So we're satisfied there's nothing there of particular importance that would be harmed by the development. We can just draw members' attention to the supplementary report. It's item 2 on there. I'll start, I'm afraid, with a bit of an apology about an omission within the report that isn't listed here, but I'm doing this verbally, if you like. Policy GE15 from the UDP should have been referenced in the report, and it wasn't. I'm not going to read it verbatim, but I'll read the key elements. The policy GE17 is entitled Rivers and Streams, and the text says, as part of the development of the green network, all rivers and streams will be protected and enhanced for the benefit of wildlife and where appropriate for public access and recreation. And this will be done by, and there's a series of bullet points, and point D is encouraging the creation of a continuous public footpath along one bank of major rivers and streams, except where this would conflict with important nature conservation interests or public safety. So we have taken that account, Chair. I wanted to make that clear, but it is, I'm afraid, an omission from the report. We've received an additional representation. It's kind of described to some extent there from the Sheaf and Porters Rivers Trust, and that followed publication of the committee report. They acknowledge the presence now of the walk, which is a positive element, but had two remaining concerns. The key one, perhaps, is that the Trust would like the Council to adopt the route and that of the adjoining sites, and a concern that there's a wall shown on the plans between this site and the adjacent site, providing a barrier to achieve a future link. At the time of producing the committee report, Chair, that we were awaiting an amended plan that removed that particular bit of wall. That has now come, and it's been replaced by a lightweight security fence panel, which can easily be removed in the event of connection being achieved. And secondly, in order for a route to be adopted by the Council, there are normally 4 general conditions to be met. They are: 1, that there's a direct link with existing public highway; 2, it's of sufficient use to the public; 3, it's open to the public at all times; and 4, it's constructed to an appropriate standard. The proposal at present we don't feel meets points 1 and 2, is unlikely to meet the 4th. Therefore, currently there is no intention of the proposed link being adopted, or the others that are immediately adjacent. There are 2 amended conditions. Condition 2 is to reflect the change in the site plan, and condition 22, which required a walkway agreement in respect to the river walk, is removed and deleted, and that's because of the next bit. So there's an amended recommendation which acknowledges that a legal agreement, a Section 106 agreement, is a more effective way to ensure that the public access areas adjacent to the river are provided, that they remain accessible to the public and are maintained. We have discussed this with the applicant, Chair, who has agreed to enter into an agreement to secure this. Therefore, there is a change to the recommendation from applying grant conditionally to grant conditionally subject to a planning obligation under Section 106, with the following heads of terms: that require the applicant to provide the public access area adjacent to the River Sheaf, as shown on the proposed site plan, to ensure public access area remains open to the public, to maintain the public access area and prevent closure of that area other than for maintenance. I'm sorry, that was quite long, Chair.
I'm very impressed, Chris, that you managed to keep your place in all of that. That was a very complex report. Thank you. I have 2 speakers to this application. The first is Mr. Simon Ogden, who's speaking against the application. Mr. Ogden, if you'd like to come forward to one of these central tables, make yourself comfortable, and the floor is yours for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the Sheaf and Porter Rivers Trust, a registered charity dedicated to putting the sheaf back into Sheffield, in short. Our original objection to the application was supported by over 60 others. I'm also chair of the Council's Waterway Strategy Group and a retired Planning and Regeneration Officer of 43 years' experience. I'm aware, Chair, that visual aids are discouraged at this committee, but if the Chair is willing, I do have a useful plan of the route that I'm going to refer to, which I'm sure will be helpful to members. Do I have your permission to give it to them or not?
If you can do it within 5 minutes and without disrupting this meeting.
Thanks, Roger. I'd like to make it clear from the outset that we are not now objecting to this application. only to one section of the officer report concerning the continuity and adoption of the Sheaf Riverside Trail, as mentioned by Chris. We'd actually like to thank the applicant, his team and the planning case officer for meeting almost all of our requests within the site boundary of the application. However, the site's wider significance for us and for many others who care about access to and the stewardship of our rivers is that it provides a missing link to open up almost a kilometre of lost riverside trail along the River Sheaf between properties on Queen's Road and the Midland Railway line, and which is currently wholly inaccessible, either for enjoyment or for active travel or for maintenance of the river. Most of this route is in fact already in place, as you can see from the plan that you've hopefully now got in front of you, or the aerial photograph in fact. It's hidden behind the premises of Travis Perkins in Big Yellow Storage, and it was built only a decade ago by them under planning obligations approved by this committee and to the council's prescribed adoption standards at the time, including paving, safety railings, street lighting, with the express intention that it would be adopted by the council when connected to a public highway. If you flip over the aerial photograph, you'll see some pictures of it on the other side, or a picture of it rather. Only the short connecting links, shown in green and blue on the aerial photograph, at its two ends are missing. The northern link is now to be provided by the applicant, and consent for a southern one has been negotiated by the trust with the landowner Big Yellow. However, the officer report, page 85, makes three statements which we must challenge. First one, an existing section of the Riverside Walk between the site boundary and Myrtle Road is unadopted, and as it does not link to the highway on Myrtle Road, resulting in a dead end. And owing to a significant difference in land levels at that point, it is highly unlikely to be adopted in the future. We would say that this is in fact, unfortunately, factually incorrect. As mentioned, the Trust has now obtained an agreement in principle from Big Yellow to construct a level connection through an unused landscape area in their ownership, back to the junction of Queen's Road and Myrtle Road, where incidentally there's a controlled crossing. We actually already offered as a trust to raise funds to construct this short section. You'll see a view of that on one of the photographs in front of you, and Chris also showed a slide of it in his previous presentation. I would add there are also arches underneath Myrtle Road, which in time could allow a more direct access to Cutler's Walk, which is the next section of the Sheaf Trail. But in the short term, the link that the trust has negotiated would bring it back to the adopted highway. Second statement, there is no realistic prospect of a fully segregated footpath cycle route being established here, given the relationship to Myrtle Road, and that current adoptable standards would require a 4.5 metre width, significantly impacting on the usable area of the site. I would point out to members that 4.5 metres is as wide as a suburban road. It allows 2 cars to pass, and I'm struggling to think of anywhere else in the urban area where this has been achieved or desired in such a setting. The existing route here is generally 3 metres wide, which is the same as many miles of adopted and well-used riverside trails across the city, including the Five Ways Walk and all other parts of the River Sheaf Trail. Yes, within the section which the applicants cite, it is narrower at between 2 and 2.4 metres, as Chris has pointed out, but it runs parallel to the vehicle access to the premises, which will be very low speed and suitable for most cyclists. Third statement, a walkway, however, can be achieved that enables access to the river edge, and this is seen as a positive benefit for the scheme, which will enable other underutilised sections to be brought into use. Therefore, a walkway agreement can be entered into that requires it to remain open for public use, which is similar to other schemes along the rivers in areas like Kelham and Meadow Hall.
Could you start summarising,
Yep.
please?
As it happens in my career, I was involved in negotiating both these arrangements, and I can assure the committee that this is not a comparable situation. Both of those sites have a commercial interest in attracting the public to their sites, and that is not the case with either Big Yellow or Travis Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Ogden.
Sorry, just to conclude.
Sorry, it's over 5 minutes now. We have to allow everybody 5 minutes to be fair.
I just request that that part of the report is not approved by highways. Sorry, by this highway committee, and officers are asked to speak to the trust about it. That's it.
Thank you. I now have another speaker on this item, Mr. Tom Vincent. Mr. Vincent, if you'd like to take your place, I'm sure you can use the other. Okay, Mr. Vincent, the floor is yours. You have up to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon again, Chair and members. I'm Tom Vincent from Urbana, and I'm speaking as the planning agent representing the applicants. The scheme will provide a much sought after hot food takeaway store with not just a drive-through option but a walk-in option with outside seating. The new use will replace dated commercial facilities that are no longer suitable for their purpose, and in doing so will positively regenerate and activate an underutilised site for the benefit of the local community. The location of the drive-through is suitable for its use, adjoining an arterial road into the city centre, on which similar services are also available. Indeed, it has been agreed that the proposed unit will not have any capacity implications on the local highway network. The site falls within a fringe industry and business area as defined in the Unit Area Development Plan, listing one of the preferred uses in these areas as food and drink outlets. Similarly, local policy requires that the Queen's Road corridor to be non-residential and to accommodate business, industry, retail and leisure outlets that are not appropriate for city centre and district centre uses. The redevelopment of this site as a drive-through facility is therefore acceptable and in line with the relevant national and local policy. The demolition of the existing building will facilitate a positive reuse of the site, as the existing building is not of merit, nor does it have any special architectural merit. The scale and massing of the unit will sit agreeably within the surrounding street scene, as well as within the context of the proposed car parking, drive-through routes and river footpath. Crucially, Core Strategy Policy CS73 seeks development to open up Sheffield's main river corridors and maintaining and enhancing them where possible. The proposals extend the River Sheaf Walk, allowing previously installed pedestrian infrastructure to be activated and help bring the walk closer to the city centre. In doing so, the proposals make significant positive contribution in realising the Council's vision for embracing Sheffield's natural assets and making them available to the public. The 600mm high brick wall that runs along the river footpath will contain coping as to allow for the opportunity for customers and walkers to sit and enjoy the view overlooking the river. In terms of the acceptability of the footpath from a highways perspective, the heads of terms of a walkway agreement have been agreed by the applicant to ensure the river footpath will remain open for public use whilst remaining under private ownership. It has been agreed that there will be no adverse impact on ecology, landscaping, highway safety matters or on the amenities of the closest neighbouring properties, which has been secured by condition. The proposed development will also provide local employment opportunities, both in the construction and operational phase of the development. The design of the proposed site plan has reached an optimum position in opening up the footpath, facilitating the required number of parking spaces and allowing for acceptable tracking for access and egress and manoeuvrability around the site. In summary, the applicant has worked positively and closely with planning officers to provide the highest quality scheme of the site, meeting all relevant national and local planning policy. The new use is a clear improvement on existing premises, and the drive-through use has been accepted by both planning and highways officers. Particularly, extending the Riverside Walk is both a favourable and pragmatic aspect of the scheme, with wide-ranging benefits that go far beyond the site itself. We would therefore request that the officer's recommendation to approve be carried out by members today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vincent. Chris, is there anything that you'd like to rebut or make a statement on in that?
Just comment perhaps on one or two of the first speaker's references, just in terms of the section on page 85, I think, particularly. Yes, I think I acknowledged in my my update report, the supplementary information, that in responding to that, perhaps, that we now acknowledge that there's a bit more to the story than the footpath currently leading nowhere behind Big Yellow. It does at the moment, that is factually correct, but there is, we do acknowledge that the Trust have shared with us a proposal that would bring it round between the building and the housing, building at the back of the houses on Myrtle Road, which is Big Yellow, and the junction of Queen's Road and Myrtle Road, where there is a pedestrian crossing. There is no It's not there at the moment. There is no planning permission for it. I'm not aware of it, starting tomorrow, but there is a proposal for that to happen at some point in the future. I think the 4.5 metre reference is a reference to an ideal width for an adopted section of segregated footpath cycleway, and that's made up of 2.5 metre cycleway and 2 metres footpath, to my understanding. And yes, we acknowledge that there are other areas around the city where that won't have been achieved. I think there are one or two where it has, but that's a preference and a starting point for highway standards on that. And the walkway agreement reference, again, we've acknowledged that that's not correct, and that 106 is a more appropriate route, which has now been secured as a principle, obviously not yet delivered and signed, but the recommendation is to grant condition is subject to that happening, which would mean that the applicant would have to enter into that before they got the planning permission.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm going to open up now to members' questions. I've got an indication from Councillor Humshaw. Brian.
Yes, Chris, on that last point, what would that mean in effect, an S106 agreement? Could you clarify, could you go through in detail, please?
Yes, Chair, and it might be worth here just turning back to the supplementary information, item 2, bottom of page 3, that refers to amended recommendation. So it's an agreement that's entered into by the applicant, the landowner, with the council, that they have to comply with the heads of terms that are set out within it. That is then signed and sealed by all interested parties. And those 4 points are what are listed on they're over the page on page 4. That the public access area adjacent to the river sheaf, as shown on that plan in front of you, is provided. That it remains open to the public, that it's maintained, and closure of it is prevented other than for maintenance.
Thank you. Is that satisfactory, Councillor? Yeah, okay. Any more questions? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, in condition compliance condition 25, you talk about customers should not be permitted on the premises outside 6 till midnight. Is there a way we could, with protecting the amenity of the neighbours, we could make Sunday night a bit earlier? You've done that in terms of deliveries. Is that a possibility? And also, under those words, there's no restriction on staff being on site at all. I don't know how long it takes to open up or close the Costa Coffee, but it could well be they need to be there at 5 and leave by 1, which, by my reckoning, is 20 hours in a 24-hour day. It seems an awfully long time for possible disturbance to neighbours. That's my first question.
Chris, would you like to respond to that initially?
Chair, I think the main purpose for I think what I'd start by saying is that generally these uses aren't open much beyond about 10:30, maybe 11 o'clock at night, and don't tend to open before about sort of 7 or 8 in the morning, from what I can see looking at others around the city. We felt that the main thing we were interested in avoiding was customers in the early hours of the morning gathering there, sitting in cars or whatever, drinking coffee and what have you, potentially disturbing the people most significantly in the nearest house. We felt that the hours that we've proposed there would avoid that, and they're what's been agreed with the applicant. It's a member's gift to constrain those hours slightly if they disagreed with those. In terms of staff on site, yeah, we didn't feel it was necessary to prevent staff being on site beyond that time because, first of all, there's often a need for that, for a bit of opening up or security or whatever. But secondly, we didn't feel that that would result in the same level of potential disturbance that a group of customers might do. So, as I say, that's the reason we've done that, and it is within members' gift to change that if they could agree on that, Chair.
Is that okay, Richard?
Yeah, I'd be interested in what other members feel. I just think it's a bit too late, especially on the Sunday night. Well, I could recommend 10 o'clock on a Sunday night closing.
Is that a proposal?
Yeah.
Gary, I can see you indicating. Is it on this point?
Yeah, I'll second that, Chair.
Councillor Price, is it on this point?
I don't agree, Chair. I think it's a very busy area. It's very noisy. There's traffic all the time. I think it's an unreasonable restriction, telling you the truth. I think any sort of should be a similar application to the other parts of the city where costs go down. I think the officer's recommendation is in line with that. I'm going to go along. I don't see any exception in this case to any of the others we've agreed. So I'm going to support the officer's recommendation.
Right. So we've had a proposal. We've had it seconded. I propose to take the vote on that before I've got that you indicated, Mike. I've got that you wanted to ask a question, but I just want to get this out of the way first. So we have a proposal that trading hours are restricted. The condition is amended to restrict trading hours to a closure of 10 p.m. on Sunday evening. Does anybody want to speak to that, or shall I move straight to the vote? I'll move straight to the vote. I propose to take it on a show of hands. If we're close, I'll revisit it. So, all those in favour of that proposal? All those against? So that's carried. Yeah. Okay. IB makes that 6-4 and 3 against, so that amendment to the trading hours is carried. And we'll go back to the main line of questioning now. I've got Councillor Councillor Williams, did you have a second question?
Chair, just a point of clarification, really. In condition 26, you talk about restricting hours for movement, sorting or removal of waste materials and recyclables. Does that include supplying the store again with the goods it sells?
No, Chair, that's specifically for the kind of things that you often find outside in commercial properties, commercial businesses. So it'll be if there's a bottle bank or those storage area for refuse, etc. General servicing arrangements will be covered in the servicing management plan. And I can't find the condition reference while I'm talking to you, Chair, but that's where it would be. Condition 14.
Is that okay, Brian?
Yeah, that's fine, thank you. And finally, just regarding deliveries, I'm looking at slide 40 and just to the top right of the actual building's footprint, I see that as some form of articulated lorry with just below the 21 parking spaces. I can't see how that lorry could possibly get into that position, given the layout of the car parking, and it just concerns me that the only way it could get in there is if it backed in off the main road, which I've seen happen in other towns, and it invariably causes trouble.
Okay, Chris, would you like to respond to that?
Chair, I think Helen might be best placed to respond to that.
Helen, do you want to respond to that?
Thank you, Chair. We've not actually tracked this for an articulated vehicle because it's not likely to be serviced by that type of vehicle. The largest vehicle that's likely to service is the refuse vehicle, which can, as I say, subject to the parking spaces, being retained clear, can get in and manoeuvre, so it can enter and exit in forward gear, because obviously that is something we don't want vehicles reversing either to or from Queen's Road. Obviously any smaller service vehicles may be able to use the loop round, but certainly the larger one can manoeuvre in the area required, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Chaplin indicating, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Just by way of light relief, Chris, I just wondered if you had a wager on as to how many times your bicycle could feature in the photos. But on a more serious point, the mature trees that we saw yesterday on the site visit, they looked healthy. There's a birch tree that's further south, and then to the north there seemed to be some other deciduous trees. It was difficult to get up close to see what state they were in, but is there any reason why they can't be preserved? Has some assessment been made of those trees as to their state of health? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Chris, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, Chair. There has been an assessment. If you just bear with me a second. It's referenced at the bottom of page 87. There's 11 trees towards the riverbank, consisting of 9 alders and 2 birch, varying between 6 and 12 metres in height, and they're the category C1, which was limited merit. Some of them were suppressed, some had leans, and some were growing on top of the walls, etc. The proposal is to clear all of them, but there will be opportunity to retain some as part of the landscaping scheme if we feel that that's appropriate and achievable. It's the kind of thing that as the thing gets closer to being built, we'll be in a better position to advise and discuss with the applicant. For example, the walkway cuts through the middle of what is currently an area of vegetation, and obviously that would take out any within its way and immediately adjacent, but there might be opportunities to retain 1 or 2. But I think it's more honest to say that most of them, the existing trees, will go, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. Is that okay, Mike?
Thank you for that.
Can I just ask that you turn me? Thank you. Okay. And I've also got Brian Hamshaw, Councillor.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. The planning conditions mention cycle accommodation, and I wanted to check whether we can propose that the cycle accommodation is changed to secure cycle storage so that people can sit inside, safe in the knowledge that the bike is still going to be there when they come outside. This is something that has been done in places such as Gripple, the company Gripple, and other companies here in Sheffield. And I'm sure that Costa Coffee would entertain this idea if we put it forward.
Thank you, Councillor. Chris?
Chair, I think there's a difference between and partially a barrier to achieving that on a site like this compared with something like the company that was mentioned or any other building development which is fundamentally a place of work, because the secure storage that we do secure on employment based development is one where the people that work there can have access to keys, to codes, whatever, that allows them to access the building which the bikes are then stored in. Here, it would be primarily for customers, although there would be the opportunity for some, for staff to use it as well, of course. And that makes that very difficult for a customer to have access to a secure building, because then, if there's open access, it removes the security. So, typically, the approach here is not secure cycling, secure cycle parking. It's facilities, stands, etc., against which bikes can be locked while customers are inside.
Okay, thank you for that. I don't see any more indications, so I'll go for members' comments. I can't see any indication of comment. Oh, right, Councillor Humshaw.
Sorry, I expected other people to jump in there. Right, okay. Comments on this? Well, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I really don't like the idea of a drive-through anything. We don't want to be encouraging car use in this city, as far as I'm concerned. I think this is an opportunity for a riverside coffee toilet stop on a newly opened up section of the river, where tables and seating and as I just said, safe cycle storage exist on the banks of the River Sheaf. I think it needs a robust planting scheme along the edge of the development to protect customers and others using the site from the air-polluted corridor of Queen's Road and to enhance the area. I think this is an opportunity to have Sheffield's very first active travel riverside coffee shop. I was going to ask that this planning application be withdrawn by the developer. I think that the inherent difficulties and contradictions in building a footpath and a cycleway that isn't fit for purpose should be addressed before we move forward on this. I think that is a resubmission that should be both pro-business and pro-environment. However, if the Sheaf and Porter Rivers Trust are content with how it lies at the moment, which is in the hands of an S106, then I will be prepared to not vote against it, but I would abstain on this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I've got Councillor Peter Price indicated.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're expecting too much of it. This is not a supermarket. It's not a big event. This is a coffee shop. And I think we're asking too much of a single service area. And I think it's improved the area. I think that walkway, and hopefully it gets a cycleway as well, will vastly improve the area. And I just think we're making very heavy weather of it, Chair. And I support it, because it is a bit dismal down there. The buildings that's going to be removed need removing. And a simple coffee shop, which it's interesting that if it had been a pub, they could have opened long after 10 o'clock, because they're serving coffee. They're shutting at 10 on Sundays. But anyway, I lost that one. No, Chair, I support the officer's recommendation. I think what's being asked for is far too heavy on a single tenant. If it was a multi one, that would be different. But I think in this case, I'm going to support the recommendation, Chair.
Thank you, Pete. I've got Councillor Masters.
Yeah, it was a comment from yesterday, really. I mean, it was so difficult for us to park in that area. Then parking is an issue, and I know that people drive around looking for a place to drink. So even though I regret the fact that Acosta has to open, I actually think it's a very practical measure now to deal with sort of an issue. I don't think it will detract from businesses there simply because of the difficulty in crossing a road there. But to drive into the space is straightforward, but it will encourage other people on the walk to use it. And I think it's just a really useful stepping stone linking the River Sheaf. So I can take it, I can regret quite a few things about it, but I think where we are now, it's one way of encouraging people to actually get out of their cars, to be quite honest, because of the potential for the links. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. And I've got Councillor Chaplin. Right.
Thank you, Chair. I think on balance, I support this recommendation. I think I would be looking at it differently if we weren't making sure that the walkway by the river was not put in place. I do think it's important that we carry on opening up our natural waterways so that people have access to our rivers has already been taking place along the River Don and in other parts of the city. I do know this to be a very busy part of the city, and I can think of a lot worse developments to build on that corner area, but it seems to me that the officers have got the balance about right for this one, so I'm going to support it, Chair.
Thank you very much. I've had no further indications, so I propose to move to the vote. As always, I'll move around the room asking people if they, the officer recommendation is to, bear with me because this is going to be a long one. The officer recommendation is to grant conditionally, subject to a planning obligation under section 106 with heads of terms as set out in the supplementary report, section 2, and also as amended by the discussion during this meeting. So I'll go around the room asking people whether they're in favour of the officer recommendation, against or abstaining. And the first one to call on is Councillor Downing. Tony, could you use your microphone for the benefit of the...
Yeah, I'm for the officer recommendation.
Thank you, Tony. Councillor Holmeshaw.
I will abstain on this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chaplin.
For the recommendation, Chair.
Councillor Downs.
For the recommendation, Chair.
For, Chair.
Councillor Masters.
For the recommendation, Chair.
Councillor Williams.
For, Chair.
Councillor Wetherall.
For, Chair.
Councillor Davison.
For, Chair.
Councillor McCann.
For, Chair.
And finally, Councillor Woodcock.
For, Chair.
That recommendation is carried. Thank you very much. Now we come to agenda item 10C, which is a full planning application numbered 21/03651 FUL, and it's for the demolition of a public house, which is retrospective, and erection of single-class storey building comprising 3 retail units, use class E, with associated parking and landscaping. And the location is the Royal Oak, 53 High Street, Mosborough, and that's S20 5AF. And it's Gareth that's presenting this application, and this is his first planning meeting, so you've got to be nice. Gareth.
Thanks, Chair. So, as members will know from yesterday's visit, the pub's been demolished without planning permission. So that element of the scheme's retrospective. On that basis, there's been a large number of objection locally to the scheme. And the primary reason is for the unauthorised demolition of the public house building. So in this case, the proposal is to replace that building retrospectively with a retail unit which comprises 3 units, a small supermarket to the front and 2 smaller units to the side. So in determining the application, the key issues are the loss of the pub itself, the principle of the retail development, the design of the scheme, the parking and servicing arrangements, and also the impact on the amenities of the locality. So as you can see from the slide up there, it's a square site fronting Mosborough High Street, and the site's in a designated housing area. Next slide, please. So from the context of the satellite image there, you can see that the site formerly housed the public house building centrally within the site. That was a building surrounded by car parking and some green space acting as a beer garden. And the pub had been heavily extended over time with various extensions front, side and rear. So the pub's now, like I say, been demolished and the site's vacant and derelict. Next slide, please. So that image just shows the pub as it was before the demolition, obviously. A characterful enough building, stone fronted. It sat adjacent to the side gable of the neighbouring property there that you can see on the right. So in terms of assessing the loss of the building, obviously it's regrettable that the developer chose to demolish without seeking permission first. In assessing the contribution the pub made to the community, you know, it wasn't a listed building, it's not within a conservation area. Whilst it's a traditional stone building, it wasn't be likely to be listed or anything like that. And it was vacant and closed, as you can see from that image there. So with it not being listed as an asset of community value, the extent to the contribution the pub makes is primarily as the design of the building. There are various pubs in the locality. There are 5 within 10-minute walk. So it couldn't be demonstrated that there was a sort of outstanding need for the pub to remain. So on that basis, the demolition or loss of the pub would be acceptable. Next slide, please. So these photos just show the current state of the site. So in the top left photograph, that's looking south and west to the residential boundaries beyond that part of the site, which is in an elevated position. So that shows that those neighbouring properties sit higher than the site would, the land level of the site. In the top right corner you can see that's the northern boundary of the site and the side gable of number 63 High Street that sits on the boundary of the site, and that's at a similar land level to the site. That's the nearest residential property affected by the proposal. The bottom right photo shows, just for context, looking down High Street to the north, and the bottom left hand photograph again shows the site's rear boundary. That's looking across the site. You can see in the centre the site's main tree that was heavily pollarded. The other trees are adjacent sites. So that tree is the only sort of main tree within the site itself which would be lost. However, it sits at the back of the site and isn't, you know, too publicly visible. An appropriate replanting scheme would be achieved in any case. Next slide, please. So this is the site plan. It shows how the retail unit would sit. The retail unit itself is identified by the sort of light grey and green rectangles. The green is the roof, which would be a brown roof for ecological enhancement. You can see that the dark grey area surrounding the unit is the access for vehicles. The sort of light brown is the parking area to the front, side and rear. And if you look around the green area, you can see there's a red dashed line. That shows where the pub sat, so you can see from that image there that the retail unit would sit in a similar position in terms of building line to where the pub sat. Next slide, please. So this is a closer look at the site plan. This is actually the landscaping plan that was submitted. It shows, just in a little bit more detail, that the appropriate parking can be achieved as 32 spaces, including 3 disabled spaces. It shows that up onto a retaining wall would be some surrounding landscaping to the south and east boundaries. The delivery bay would be to the rear, and the report mentioned a right-of-way. So to confirm that would be a private right-of-way to the north of the site, which runs, as you can see, across the top of that image there. That will be maintained. So in terms as well on the landscaping, there'd be a green wall and appropriate native tree planting, and as I've said before, the brown roof is more clearly shown on there, which would be for habitat creation. Next slide, please. So this slide is just the floor plan. It shows that the 3 retail units with some back of house space. Like I say, the main retail unit fronting the site would be a small supermarket. And again, you can see there the delivery arrangements to the back of the unit. So in terms of the principle of the retail development, it's a housing area, as I stated. It's approximately 125 metres away from the designated local shopping centre on High Street in Mosborough. So it's in close proximity to that. A sequential test was submitted to identify any potential sites within that centre that could accommodate this development. No sites were identified, so therefore it passed the sequential test as required by National Planning Policy Framework. So the principle in a housing area is therefore acceptable, subject to the impact on amenity. Concerns have been raised about the impact on the viability of the existing centre. However, Mosborough High Street is a very active centre. There's no vacant units. A good range of uses is within that centre. So there's an equal argument to say that that would support the viability of the centre rather than detract from it, increasing footfall through linked trips. Like I say again, it's in close proximity to the centre. And there is a need for a supermarket in Mosborough, given that the nearest one's a 20-minute walk away in Halfway. Next slide, please. So, from a design perspective, you can see from the elevations that it would be a rather contemporary approach. However, you know, it would be a flat roof, single-storey building, but with use of large glazed openings to break that up, and also natural stone to blend in with the local character of the area. The area is predominantly traditional with stone terraces, but there is a mix of more recent infill development in the vicinity. The development sits quite comfortably in the site, separated from residential uses. The massing and scale is appropriate for the area, and like I say, the contemporary approach is considered to be acceptable, contributing to that range of architecture in the area. And again, it's set back, it meets the building line as the previous pub did, and there's a positive interaction with the high street there. Next slide, please. So these are just the visuals. You can see from the bottom visual that the site would be slightly excavated further. It's excavated a little bit at present, be excavated further towards the rear, so the building would sit quite low within the site, particularly from the south, which would screen neighbouring uses. Like I said earlier, the main impact is on number 63, which is to the north of the site. That red elevation that you can see, the red brick elevation, would face that neighbouring property. As that visual indicates, there'd be a 3.5 metre separation to the boundary. And in terms of overbearing of that neighbouring property, the previous pub building had an approximate 10 metre projection at 2-storey height, and this development would have a similar impact on the most usable garden space and the main habitable windows of that neighbour. Beyond that, whilst this does project further, the separation is considered to be adequate in terms of not unreasonably overbearing the rest of that neighbour's garden. In terms of noise from commercial operations, a submitted noise assessment has indicated the impact would be acceptable, subject to conditions, one of which would be the installation of acoustic screens, so timber fences to the site boundaries, which is standard anyway in terms of a design impact. We can control deliveries and hours of use to appropriate times with planning conditions, so the operating hours would be until 10 o'clock on any day, starting at 8, which is standard for such sort of local small-scale supermarkets. In terms of the deliveries as well, the we can condition a management plan to ensure that that's undertaken sensitively and appropriately in the local area. The final issue on this one is the one of a chemical spill, which was being reported on the site. Some of the facts haven't been established about that. However, from a planning perspective, we've not given any weight to this as a reason for the demolition of the building. That shouldn't have occurred regardless of any other issues. The chemical spill would just be dealt with by standard planning conditions that would require the investigation and remediation of the site. In terms of potential migration of contaminants onto neighbouring property, the Environmental Protection Service has set up a multi-agency team to look into this and address that as an ongoing issue, and that's going to be done outside of the planning process. So that issue isn't directly relevant to the proposal in question, and it will be picked up separately, like I say, outside of the planning process. Just to move on to the supplementary information, I've already covered the first point in terms of the land contamination issue. In terms of vehicle tracking and delivery, we received an additional site plan showing vehicle tracking, just to make sure that the largest vehicle that would enter the site to service it can indeed turn in the site and exit in a forward gear. They've done that on the basis of a 12-metre rigid vehicle, which is acceptable. That would be the largest vehicle to enter the site, so no articulated vehicles would be allowed to enter the site by condition. So therefore, we just need to amend the condition to reflect that, and also add an additional condition to state that no articulated vehicles would be able to enter the site or service from the highway. I've already covered the private rights of way issue. That's just to state that the report should state that it's a private right of way to the north of the site, and public rights of way would be a material consideration, but in this case it's a private right of way, therefore it's not a material consideration. We've had a couple of additional objections based primarily on the loss of the pub, and also from Clive Betts MP, again raising concerns about the breach of planning and the precedent that would set. Those issues have been covered in the officer report already. They're only repeating the previous objections. And we want to stress that it is obviously disappointing that the developer chose to demolish the pub without permission. That was obviously not the right way of going about the development of the site. But we've not given any weight to the fact that the pub's already been demolished. It's the assessments with the assumption that the pub's still in situ, and that in itself isn't a reason to refuse the scheme. It is, we consider this is a suitable replacement scheme for a building that was underutilised, and therefore members would be advised to follow the officer recommendation to grant the application conditionally. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't actually have any speakers on this, but I do notice that there are two members of the public in the audience who approached the members as we were on visits yesterday. So with the permission of this meeting, I'm going to step completely outside the accepted procedure and policy and invite them if they would like to come and speak. It's Mr. Watson. Watton. Right. So, Mr. Watton, you're down as an attendee. I will offer you the opportunity to speak in the same way that other people that you've seen today have spoken. So if you want to speak, please come forward to one of the mics, and you have up to 5 minutes at your convenience. You push the central button, Mr. Watton, to turn the microphone on, and the floor is yours for up to 5 minutes.
Yeah, hi. I'm Mr. Watton. I live at 63 High Street, Mosborough, side of the Royal Oak. It's my house that's been affected by the chemicals that weren't spilled, let's get that clear. They was dumped deliberately by two known associates of one of the developers. That's a fact. The police have investigated it, they just haven't got enough evidence.
Mr. Watton, can you not, I think Vic is signalling very, very clearly to, if please don't make accusations against people, because it's been publicly broadcast and there might be repercussions for yourself or us in legal terms.
Right.
Yep, okay.
Yeah, so obviously the chemicals were dumped, they weren't spilled as such. I'm objecting to the fact that I was with the developer, or one of the developers, on the day they were knocking the pub down. He was laughing his head off, he was going to get a £5 grand fine. I think it's disgusting. I've lost absolutely everything as a direct result of these chemicals. Now what the developer's doing is pushing his development further and further to the side of my house. It's over 300-year-old. It will not take somebody digging out footings. When we were trying to get it tested for the boreholes to find out how deep the chemicals gone in the ground, they couldn't put the boreholes too close to the building, obviously because they were worried about damaging the gable end. They're also building something that's going to shadow my garden. I'm going to have no light. During the winter months, I'm only going to get sun for back end of the day. It's going to affect the local businesses. I mean, I know lots of them, you know what I mean, it's going to pretty much close them. I've no objection if they're going to build it over to the left-hand side. Do you know what I mean? At least give us the light, you know what I mean? There's no reason for them to be building it as close as they are to our property. Thank you.
That's absolutely fine. If you don't have to take your whole 5 minutes. If you said what you feel you want to say, I'd just ask you to turn your mic off, and thank you very much for your contribution. Okay. Okay. Again, I'm going way out of practice, and I've got Chris St. Joseph's at the back of the room indicating. Do I take it that you want to speak? I'll allow it this time, but I have to say, myself and my co-chair are going to, I believe, going forward, to take a firm line on disruptions.
I thank you for your indulgence, Chair. I did send an email in today. I've been trying all week to try and get in on this. I want the committee to refuse this with enforcement action. What has been done by a developer to demolish a building that's best part of 200, probably even older in some parts, years old, without going through the proper process is an absolute disgrace. The way this has been done with the issues of saying there's a chemical spill we have to demolish, no they didn't, there's ways to deal with chemical spills. This is about somebody taking the planning process and ignoring it. And it opens up a can of worms for this city, because there are other buildings in the city and in the southeast that a developer could get hold of, knock them down and say, oh, I'll hold my hand up, I should have gone for planning permission. If you take to refuse it with enforcement action, there's a wonderful precedent. A pub in London called the Carlton Tavern was knocked down. The developer was made to rebuild it. So you've got a precedent there to say we can refuse this with enforcement. Can I also say that the, where are we? Have a look at this. The issue about whether it's a listed building or not. Well, quite a few people in Mosborough thought it was a listed building. They thought it was a listed building, but if this developer had gone through the process of putting in a planning application, the chances are that somebody might have then wanted to go for listing. We'll never know now, because you can't list something that's not there. You can't ask for a community asset that's not there because it's been demolished illegally. So please, take a courageous decision. Protect the city and its buildings by stopping developers doing this action time and time again and getting a slap on the wrist. You're rewarding somebody for doing something illegal. And I know it's your first time, Gareth, and I enjoyed your presentation. But I've said for a long time, when I used to be a member of this committee, we need to make sure that developers keep within the planning guidelines. This developer's ignored it, and he's trying to get away with it by putting this scheme up and saying that there was a few reasons that the building was knocked down, which is spurious at best. So committee, please, make the right decision again. Turn this down, enforcement action, make him rebuild it. That'll punish him, and that'll be what the people of Mosborough have been asking for. It should never have been demolished, because the people of Mosborough was a character building, and they love that building. Thank you, Chair.
Vicky, given the two representations that we've just had, is there anything that you would like to say at this point?
Thank you, Chair. Just in respect to the last speaker, there was just a couple of things that I wanted to pick up there in terms of enforcement action. So in terms of enforcement action, we only take that where it's expedient to do so. So in the current situation, members have actually got an officer report here advising that irrespective of the building already being demolished, even if it hadn't been demolished, the planning officers would still be recommending granting this application. I think that would suggest that it wouldn't therefore be expedient to take any enforcement action. The last speaker also mentioned something about listing, and I wasn't sure as to whether that was a reference to listing in terms of the heritage of the building or whether it was in respect of an asset of community value. In terms of listing of a building for heritage reasons, that's not something I'm particularly familiar with, but in terms of an asset of community value, even where a building has been demolished, assets of community value have still been listed. So there isn't a bar to a future ACV application, for example. And yes, thank you, Chair. Just with respect to the other matter, I was grateful for your intervention in terms of ignoring any allegations and how that's not really relevant to deciding this planning application today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vicky. I'm going to return the floor to you now, Gareth, to see if there's anything that you would like to rebut or talk about in those statements. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the first objective mentioned about the footings and the gable ends, it's just confirmed that that would be a building regulation issue, not a planning matter. The developer would obviously have to get all the required building certificates in place to ensure that the development was sound. In terms of the overshadowing, that's covered in the officer report. As discussed, the development is set 3.5 metres in from the boundary line. It's a single-storey building, approximately 8 metres in height with a parapet. The pre-existing scenario of the pub had a 2-storey projection beyond number 63 of approximately 10 metres. Now this development goes further than that, approximately 28 metres, so quite a bit further than it, but however the impact on the most usable garden area close to the rear of the property and the habitable windows would be comparable to that scenario with a 2-storey projection at 10 metres. Beyond that, the effect is on the bottom end of the garden. There'd be boundary treatments in between. It's not considered that the impact would be so harmful that would warrant refusal. In terms of the chemical spill and the demolition, no weight, as I say, has been given to that in the officer report. In fact, the report assumes that the pub's still in position. The Carlton Tavern was, obviously, each case is assessed on its merits. The Carlton Tavern was just about to be listed, a totally different scenario. This pub was knocked down, obviously wasn't about to be listed. It doesn't appear that it would likely to be listed if an application was made, given the extensive alterations that have been made to it, for example. It's obviously regrettable, and it was a characterful building. However, if that pub was still in place and this scheme came in, as Vicky said, the officer recommendation is that we would support the demolition, given the need for a supermarket in the location and also the fact that there are at least 5 other pubs within a 10-minute walk. So the need suggests that there is a requirement for such a development. And again, asset accumulated value, there wasn't one on the pub, and it was actually vacant at the time. And again, there are lots of other pubs in the vicinity, so it's unclear whether that application would have been successful in any case. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Gareth. I'll open the floor up now to members' questions. I've got Councillor Downing, followed by Councillor Humshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a series of a few questions to ask. I understand that Gareth has cleared up the issue of the chemical spill, which is not, in my view, relevant anyway, because that could have been cleared up while the pub was still there, as it's already been mentioned. The tree at the rear of the site, I know it's heavily pollarded, but is there a need for that tree to come down? Could that tree not be retained? Deliveries, I'm still unsure about deliveries. It's only a fairly narrow road with parked vehicles off High Street. Large vehicles, I understand it's not going to be articulated vehicles and that will be conditioned, but large vehicles coming in and out of that site would cause a problem there. And the third question is, and you may not be able to answer this, Gareth, but could this building not have been retained and used as other pubs have been done in the past and turned into shops rather than demolish the building? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Tony, do you want to turn your microphone? Thank you. Gareth, over to you.
So yeah, the tree's coming out as part of the proposal. That's obviously not an ideal outcome. However, the tree it sits right at the back of the site, and there's not a lot of public amenity benefit to that tree being retained. It's in a poor condition. The replacement landscaping scheme would offer 10 replacement trees, native shrub planting, and the ecological appraisals assess that to provide a 17% net gain in biodiversity. So overall, the loss of that tree, whilst regrettable, there's significant ecological benefit to the scheme actually being implemented. Deliveries, the site is relatively tight. However, we condition a delivery management plan to ensure that they're undertaken appropriately. Turning provisions in the site have been demonstrated to be acceptable for the largest vehicle. We'd have visibility displays to the entrance to ensure safety there. And that's all covered by appropriately worded conditions to ensure an appropriate impact. And in terms of the reuse of the building, as I say, we have assumed that the building is still in place. If this application came in, we would support it based on the benefits of the scheme and balance up the proposed merits. So that hypothetical situation, you know, another developer may have reused it. In this case, we can only assess what's in front of us, and that is to replace it with a larger development, which would have its benefits in terms of it's you know, the development of a brownfield site. It's providing additional jobs in the area. So the sustainability benefits, even though the demolition is a negative in terms of the sustainability credentials, we conditioned all that to make sure that the build itself is sustainable and it is in a sustainable location for such a use.
Thank you, Chair, but I'll have a comment later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now have Councillor Brian Humshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I'm still puzzled as to why there has been no enforcement action taken over the property, regardless of heritage or listing or ACV status. It says in the officer's report that this was an unlawful demolition. Those terms are used. And the Carlton Tavern in London, I looked this up, the reason that had to be rebuilt, that enforcement action was taken in that case, was because it was unlawfully demolished. Nothing to do with the ACV status or whatever. So why is enforcement action not being taken on this building for being unlawfully demolished?
Yeah, so in terms of the enforcement action, as Vicky alluded to, it's done when it's expedient to do so. The Carlton Tavern is a totally separate case with different, there'll be all different levels of issues, one of which was the fact that the building was about to be demolished. The developers will have known that at the time. This isn't the case here. We've made the point that in the report that it wasn't the right way around doing it. It didn't receive planning approval, but that's been justified in the planning assessment in terms of the loss. It's the wrong way around. However, what they've put forward is a replacement scheme that we consider to be acceptable. Therefore, granting the permission would rectify the situation, and it wouldn't be expedient to make them rebuild the pub.
I've got Lucy here who wants to come in on that as well.
Chair, just in terms of the Carlton Tavern, the owners of that building knew that Historic England were reviewing the building, and it was very close to becoming a formal listed building. It is a completely different scenario. Nobody's sought to ask Historic England to have the Royal Oak listed. So that was a long way down the road of being listed, and the developers knew it was about to be listed. So that's a completely different act, in my opinion.
Can I come back on that, please?
Yes.
I didn't say it was anything to do with the Carlton Tavern. I said that was another situation. If it's unlawfully demolished, there has to be some enforcement action. And what does expedient mean in this case, if this is unexpedient?
Do you want to come in on that, Gareth? Or yeah. Vicky. Oh, Vicky. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. There is planning guidance here that where something like this happens, one of the options available to the authority is to invite an application to regularise the situation. And the planning guidance goes on to say that an application must be considered in the normal way. So when something like this happens, there is an unlawful either change of use, unlawful development, or in this case, unlawful demolition. This is an option available to the authority to invite an application to regularise the situation.
Is that satisfactory, Brian? Thank you.
I'll move on.
Thank you. I also have Councillor Mike Chaplin indicating to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's fair to say that all members here are not happy about the fact that this building was demolished without permission, the Royal Oak, that is. But I appreciate that we are where we are with this, and I think members have done their best to try and tease out why we can't move any further on it. I would like to go on, pick up on the point about loss of amenity on page 114. There is a paragraph about the intended new building being extended out 8.5 metres to the, I suppose that would be to the west. And I think the officer talked about it being comparable with the previous building, but I do wonder if in fact that is the case, and whether the neighbour in the nearest building to the new co-op going up would have a case that they are losing out on amenity with light being blocked. Thank you.
Gareth, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. In terms of talking about it being comparable, just to clarify, there was the pre-existing scenario was that the pub building, 2-storey in height, projected 10 metres. This isn't obviously directly comparable to that, but the term comparable being used in terms of the nearest portion of the garden to the rear elevation of number 63, which is where that 2-storey structure sat. So that would be a comparable impact in terms of daylight into the habitable rooms of that property, and also the most usable garden space next to that. In terms of the rest of the garden, this runs, like I say, 3.5 metres in from the boundary and affects the bottom end of the garden, which is considered less usable. So, generally speaking, the impact would be comparable on the most usable part of the garden and also the internal amenity space. And as I say in the report, it justifies that the rest would have an appropriate impact in terms of the amenity of the rest of the garden.
Is that okay, Mike?
Yeah, can I come back on that? It's the value judgment about the most usable part of the garden. I mean, the neighbour might have I mean, for all we know, he might have an allotment that extends down the back end of the garden that might get used regularly, or horses in a paddock. I don't know where that idea came from, but there we. Yeah. So.
I'm sorry. It's not. It isn't a dialogue at this stage. I'm sorry, Mr. Watton. We have officers responding to members' questions now. Had you finished asking your question, Mike?
It was simply to make the point that it was a value judgment, and that the whole of the garden is there for whoever occupies it to be used, and it's putting more of it into casting more of it into shadow with this development. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, that's right. In terms of the judgment, you know, we looked at the most usable part of the garden, which is generally considered to be that next to the house. In terms of the rest of the garden, it's not considered that the proximity of that development would make it unusable to a point, you know, it would overshadow it to the extent that it would become unusable. Certainly for keeping horses and things, it's not considered that the reduction in daylight would make that part of the garden just totally unusable and fit for purpose. There's of course going to be impacts of the development on daylight and things, but like I say, it's not considered that would warrant a refusal in this case, and the impact on the most usable garden closest to the house and the internal habitable windows wouldn't be dissimilar to the pre-existing scenario of the pub building with a 2-storey 10-metre projection.
You have no further questions, Mike? Okay,
no,
thank you.
No further questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you. The next person to indicate is Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just reading the proposal says demolition of public house and erection of single-storey building, because that will normally come under a full application. But then we've got in brackets retrospective demolition. So from my point of view, that means there are essentially two applications here. The application to grant retrospective demolition of the public house, and then full planning application for the erection of the thing. Can you explain it, please?
I've got Vicky indicating here, so I'm going to bring her in first, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. Just to remark again that the planning guidance does say that retrospective applications need to be dealt with in the normal way, in the usual way. So my understanding would be that this is just for information that obviously the demolition has already occurred, but I'm sure the planning officer can clarify further. Thank you.
Gareth?
Yeah, that's right. There are two elements to the scheme, rather than it being a totally separate application. The retrospective in brackets is just to let people be aware that that part's already happened. So that bit's retrospective, and then it goes on to explain what would be replacing that building. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I accept what you're saying there, but the point is, in this situation, this building was demolished without permission. So, can we clarify, were any laws broken by this action?
Vicky, would you like to come in here?
Thank you. As has already been referred to, planning an application should have been required before demolition of the property. Just as a sort of background, if you like, it was perhaps maybe 10 years ago now, you could actually demolish a pub without a planning application. But this has now been withdrawn from establishments that previously were drinking establishments. So that's happened, I think, in the last sort of 7 or 8 years. So it's something that's only been recently, if you like, in terms of planning control, it's recently changed. But yeah, they should have, because it's been taken away as permitted development, demolition of a premises as previously used as a drinking establishment should have been sought first.
Yeah, can I just clarify that? Does that mean a law was broken? That's the question.
It means that there's been a breach of planning control. I think the issue here is, you know, has something criminal happened, and that the way to rectify breach of planning control is through enforcement action. And as I've already mentioned, where you're looking at enforcement action for breach of planning control, we look at is it expedient to enforce it. And here, what planning guidance tells us is that where development is acceptable on its planning merits and formal action would only be to regularise the development, then we should still just look at a retrospective application in the normal way.
Right, so the next speaker I've got is Councillor Davison. Roger.
Thank you, Chair. In here, we're asked to assume that the building still exists, pseudo-physical existence. You also implied that you would have recommended demolition of this character building. Now, had it come to the council, intact, and it would be, you couldn't guarantee that request wouldn't have been turned down, could you?
Roger, could you just clarify? What are you asking? Are you asking for clarification of a wording in a sentence, or are you asking a straight question about a hypothetical situation where we're asked to receive an application to demolish?
This is hypothetical anyway, because you've put in a hypothetical point here about, and we're to consider it as a pseudo-entity, as if it hadn't been demolished, a pseudo-physical entity, as if it hadn't been demolished. So, yes, I am putting the hypothetical question here because I think this is important. Had that building not, I mean, you were recommending that it would be demolished anyway. Fair enough. That's a fair point. But if it had been brought to this committee and the recommendation from the committee was that it wasn't to be demolished, then we would be considering something different. So, as you couldn't guarantee that that wasn't going to be, you know, that the committee itself wouldn't have agreed to it, then how can you go forward with this?
I think until we get into metaphysics, that's very difficult to answer. But in purely legal terms, Vicky, would you like to come in and try for a response?
I don't think I think you're mistaking the term metaphysics. It's a completely different entity, but from pseudo-physics. But no,
Roger, can Vicky try and answer your question?
Yes, okay, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I think the member here is suggesting that members may be thinking about taking an alternative course with this application had the building still been in situ. But the point here is that if that is something that members think is something that's in their mind, then I think what you've got at the moment is a planning officer in a report that is, as you know, certainly don't want to put words in his mouth, and I probably invite him to come back. But are there any planning merits in retaining the building if it was still there? And when he comes back on that point, that will guide members as to whether they're turning down this application because of that reason. It's something they want to take further. Thank you.
Very clear. Gareth.
Yeah, assumption that the pub is still there, it's a simple term to say we've not given any weight to the fact it's been demolished without permission. And it's about simply the value of that pub and also the quality of the replacement scheme that's proposed. The consideration is, on balance, that the scheme is of high enough design quality, the impacts on neighbours are acceptable, the impact on highways acceptable, and it will provide a service for the local area that isn't currently met. Given the pub was vacant, the loss of any traditional stone building, especially a pub, is regrettable, but the planning merits suggest that that is an acceptable scheme to replace it with.
Is that the answer to your question? I know it's probably not the answer to your question that you wanted, but is it clear? Thank you. The next speaker I've got indicating is Councillor Weatherall. Gary.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Gareth, it was an interesting site visit yesterday, and I've read your report, understand it. But my first words were, when I read it the other day, and I put on bottom, rebuild it. You know what I mean? And I think everybody else has said that around this room today. And I understand we can't do that. I've had legal now, yourselves, saying that, the report and everything. Because at the end of the day, you know, if we go and it goes to somewhere else out this room, at this council, we'll get fined and it'll come back and really hurt us, the fine. But there's a few questions. The height of the pub and the height of the new building, I just couldn't get my head around it, especially with the stables and everything. You were saying 28 metres. Just tell me, is the pub higher or lower than this this new build? And you just got to put my mind at rest, because there's been mention about this chemicals, what's been dumped, and you know, neighbours have not been their property for a long time. And I just wonder, when we build this, when this is being built, are the members of the public who use it going to be safe? Because a few years ago, we had chemicals, radium, I think it was radium gas coming through, and lots of issues came back from that. So I just wondered, when this site, is our environmental people looking at that in some way? Because it's not been mentioned, that's all. Thanks.
Gareth, would you like to come back?
Yeah, so the building itself is lower than the pub was. The pub was a standard two-storey structure. This is a single-storey, although a relatively tall single-storey building with a parapet. It's taller to the front elevation than it is to the rear, given the parapet around the front and the design approach. So it does drop down in scale towards the rear. And in terms of the chemical spill, it will be addressed by standard conditions on the site. They're pre-commencement conditions, so no development can commence until that's all been completely sorted out, investigated and remediated. Thank you.
Gary, is that the answer to your question? Yes, Chair. Yeah. The next speaker I've got indicated is Councillor Masters. Barbara.
Thank you, Chair. I think what we're all labouring under is the fact that the pub was demolished, and there's very little repercussions for the person who demolished it. I know it's not a planning issue, but what can we do to send a clear message to anybody proposing something similar in the future? And if it's not planning, can we actually ask legal services to look at ways of protecting future buildings from this sort of action? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is sort of, you know, there was discussion yesterday about sort of contamination on the site, but it's not just the site, it's the migration from the site which is causing an issue. And that means innocent people are suffering because their land is contaminated, no fault of their own. And I just wanted, well, I think we all did yesterday, wanted sort of some kind of assurances that this would be dealt with else, you know, somewhere without, if you like, sort of damage to the injured party, which would be the neighbouring developments. Because again, it sets a precedent for the future. If something similar happens, sort of chemical spillages migrating, who's ultimately responsible if just the site where it happened was cleared? So I think it's a legal thing, but I would like to know if we can have direction to address you to look at it, the legal department or some other appropriate council body. Thank you.
Right, we have two questions there. I think one of them, are you best dealing with that, Vicky?
Thank you, Chair. In respect to the chemical spill, that is environmental protection team that will be coming back on that, and I think Gareth's already mentioned that. I think it's in the supplementary that's been looked at as a different matter. In respect to breach of planning control, the normal enforcement route is an enforcement notice, and that can include to rebuild something that's been demolished unlawfully, and then if somebody doesn't comply with the enforcement notice, you can prosecute them. And go down that road. As I say, in terms of any future protections, obviously the city has a method of planning control and where that is breached, and it is then expedient to enforce against that breach and require things to be rectified. That is something that the authority already does and does very regularly. And I think, is it a quarterly report still comes to this committee, advising on enforcement that is happening throughout the city. So in terms of that, there is already that protection and that method of rectifying breaches of planning control where it's thought it is reasonable to enforce against them.
I'm sorry, Chair, but to me that's not adequate. It's obviously not protection, it's obviously not a disincentive. And what I was asking is, can we actually ask as a committee for other something else be put in place to give extra protection as a disincentive to this happening? Because, I mean, you've told us that sort of if it's expedient to do so. Well, obviously it's not, and therefore that there's no repercussions for the person who demolished it. And that message will be taken on board. And I just want something elsewhere. If we haven't got the ability under planning regulations, where would that ability lie within the council? Because you're just quoting all the time planning regulations, and that's obviously not sufficient. So I'm not saying you've got the answer, but I'm just asking if there's somebody who can actually look at this to strengthen it.
Thank you, Councillor Masters. I mean, we do deal with planning regulations on this committee, it's quite clear. Vicky, do you want to come back again?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of disincentivising, that isn't something that the Planning Committee really should be concerning itself with in terms of this. This is an application that you need to decide based on the development plan and the material considerations associated with it. If members are indicating that they would be making a different decision on this application if the building was still in situ, and that's a different matter, and that's something I think members need to consider, is that the planning officer is asking you to make a decision on this irrespective of the demolition of the building. That's how they've weighed up the application, that's how they presented the report to you, and that is how you need to make this decision. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vicky. Can I just ask a question from the Chair? I wouldn't normally do this, but I think I just need to clarify something. Environmental Protection Services are dealing with the matter of the contamination and the migration of the contaminants. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, Chair. So outside of the planning process, the Environmental Protection Service has set up a multi-agency team with all the interested parties to go through that issue, and that'll be addressed outside of the planning process. That includes the migration of chemicals and contaminants onto neighbouring sites. In terms of the site in question, the standard planning conditions will address that as well.
Yes, thank you. I can see there's condition 39 there, which deals with that. I have another two members who are indicating that they wish to speak. I've got Councillor Richard Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Question through you to our officers. Is there anything we can put in the new local plan that we're devising that could possibly address this? I don't need the answer now, but it's a thought. And secondly, perhaps we have to take this higher up the chain to the appropriate minister and say, there is a flaw in the planning guidelines, and can you do something about it? On a slightly minor point, I'm back on deliveries. I see here that they can deliver up till 11 o'clock at night, including Sundays. I noticed that the delivery bay is at the back of the store, and it is very close to residential properties. Can we again, and I'm quite happy to propose it, restrict deliveries to earlier on a Sunday evening?
We have a proposal there. I've got two people who are seconding it. So I do have other people that want to speak on the main motion, but I'll take comments on the proposal to restrict deliveries on the Sunday.
Just that presumably the pub had permission to go way beyond 11 o'clock, didn't they?
Wouldn't have thought so on a Sunday. The other problem is that, sorry Chair, deliveries are made, even smaller trucks use tailgates. My experience and understanding is that if you use the operator tailgate, you typically leave the engine on. And diesel engines are noisy. That's the nature of them. So I'd have thought at least drop it to 10 o'clock so that it closes when the shop closes.
Okay, I've got Councillor Weatherall indicating to speak.
Yeah, we're seconding that, Chair. I think we ought to go to bank holidays as well, because it's not, the noise of the truck reversing up as well, and then getting all deliveries out in and out of the truck and its wheels going along, it's going to be bedlam. It's going to be bedlam. So Pete's right. You know, the pub would have gone up to 11 o'clock at night. You know, but or even after if they put an extension on. But I do think that, you know, shopping, this is going to be a busy shop in the neighbourhood. So that's my comment, Chair. Thanks.
Right, thank you. Do I have any more speakers on this? Right, then we've got a proposal that's being seconded that delivery should end at an earlier time on Sundays and bank holidays, and the suggestion is 10 o'clock on Sundays. I'll take this on a show of hands. All those in favour of this proposal, please indicate. Thank you. All those against? Any abstentions? I think that's carried. Yeah, okay. So we'll go back to the main item of business now. And I've got Councillor, I'm just asking, was that the end of your questions? Thank you. I've got Councillor Holmshaw indicating.
Right, firstly, just to confirm, we're still on questions, aren't we? Okay.
We are still on questions,
Okay,
although I think
so
we've had a good go, and I'll be drawing it to a close after this.
Right, so unfortunately, this is the question, it's an answer. And it's replying to Councillor Masters. Yes, I think one of the avenues we can go down, and it's also to Councillor Williams as well, one of the avenues we can go down is in terms of the local plan, but also we have such a thing as supplementary planning guidance as well, which we can start to effect on that a bit more positively than we have done in the past to enhance and protect historic buildings of a whole range and not just those that are listed, like in this situation.
I'm going to take that as a comment, and I'm going to move on to comments now. I've got two indications for comments. I've got many indications for comments. The first indication I've got for comments was Councillor Tony Downing. I'd just like you to keep your hands up so I can get your names down. Tony, over to you.
Yeah, okay. It's just a comment. I'm not sure, but I would suggest that it would be this development would benefit the community. But I have to say this because I feel so passionately about it. My understanding is that since 2015, any public house that is to be demolished due to the change in legislation has to have gone through the planning system. The Royal Oak was demolished on a Saturday morning without planning permission, an illegal act with no consequences
from the planning enforcement. This irresponsible action can be seen by future developers that it is okay not to abide by planning regulations and rules, and by the public as bringing the planning service into question. And I am going to vote against the officer recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. I've got Brian, Roger, Bob and Peter indicating to make comments. So I'll go for Brian.
Right, thank you, Chair. It says in the officer's report that the existing building could have been retained and incorporated into the development, but it wasn't. If it had, then that would have made the development much more sustainable because of embedded carbon and all that, and retrofitting. So on sustainability grounds, but also on the conservation of the area, the look of the area, the stone-built aspects of that part of Mosborough, on design, and on the sheer distress and annoyance that this has caused to local people through this chemical spill, I am going to be voting against the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to bring Peter Price in now. Pete.
Thank you, Chair. It's very emotive, this, and we all feel very, very angry. And for the first time, I agree with Clive Betts that this is an outrageous breach of planning rules. However, we are governed by planning laws, unfortunately. They aren't always fair. Now, I can assure you, we have closed at least 12 pubs and working men's clubs in this city over the last 2 years. Most of them have gone through the normal procedure. In fact, I'm involved in Shagging Working Men's Club, which is famous for its the Full Monty. Application came in to demolish it in front. And I fought like hell, but we could find no planning grounds for stopping that demolition, even when we went through the rules. So the idea that you can save this by it still being there is not necessarily follows on. Now, there may be incidents because of historic nature, that's a different argument. But the pub itself, in fact, if you remember last year, we turned one down at Abbeydale Road. They went to appeal, because they were going to develop it, and they won, and we got costs awarded against the City Council. So it cost the City Council money for us turning down, against officer recommendation, the removal of a pub. Now, I know that's hard to take, but that's the facts we have to face. Now, what we're faced with at the moment is a pile of rubble on a site. What's going to put there? Retail? Residential? We have a duty to look at that site and think what's suitable. Irrespective of what's gone off in the past, that's going to be taking place with environmental health. And I guess you're never going to find out who dumped that, because they'll all deny it. It'll never be proved, even though people do know. So we have a duty to look at what we're going to do there. And I think what's been offered is a slight plus to the people living in the area. They've not got a supermarket for quite a way away, the one that is there. And I think it's an asset to this, in spite of what's said. So reluctantly, and I agree, it's monstrous that we can't, or the authorities can't find the perpetrator of that and a considerable sum for what they've done. But we're not in that position. We've got to make a judgment on that site, Chair. And I don't think there's any alternative, because if we turn it down, we'll almost certainly appeal. And I've got a feeling that appeal will get kicked into touch. So I'm going to vote for the recommendation, Chair, reluctantly.
Thank you, Pete. I've also got Roger Davison.
Thank you, Chair. If those plans had been presented without the problem that we have been faced with, I would have been quite happy to agree with them. What I'm not happy about, of course, is the demolition without any permission from the council to do such a thing. It's and I would have been happy if plans had been brought forward and something on the lines of what somebody else had discussed earlier, that it was that old building was incorporated into it. Now, it's 200 or 300 years old. I can't remember what it's 200 years old. It's a building of character. It's one of the first things you see when you come into Mosborough, and I think that to just pass this without any consequence of what has gone before us would be wrong. So I am not going to support this application.
Thank you, Roger. I've got Bob and Cam.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I agree with Councillor Price has just said about, you know, we turn it down, it goes to appeal, blah, 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 blah. And it is a very bad situation where local councillors, which we are, basically local councillors, we have very little control over what happens in our city anymore. And it's a very bad situation. But I find myself in a situation with this particular, irrespective of whether it's a good pub, bad pub, whatever, you know. For me, the big thing is a demolition without permission. And that, for me, is the crux of this matter. And I accept that officer said they've got expedient, is in the word, to find a solution, and I accept that. But as far as I'm concerned, if we support this, we are effectively supporting an illegal act. And we as councillors, ultimately, we are representing Sheffield City Council. So that be Sheffield City Council will be supporting illegal act. And I'm afraid I can't support that. And whilst I can't see a planning reason for turning it down, so therefore I find the only thing left to me is to abstain. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've got one final speaker, but I want to go to Vicky first before I come to you, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate that the planning guidance is very clear here in terms of retrospective application, and it needs to be dealt with in the usual way. So any comments about taking the fact that it is a retrospective application into account in terms of your decision will be vulnerable to challenge. Thank you.
That's not a helpful comment. I mean, we deal with the legislation as the legislation stands, as city councillors. And I will come across to you now, Mike, Councillor Chaplin.
Thank you, Chair. I think all of us have found this very frustrating this afternoon. My line of questioning earlier focused on the possible loss of amenity, but we're dealing with a one-storey building that, while it extends out further than the Royal Oak did, it's on ground that is level, or ground that will be levelled out, so as not to cause that loss of amenity to the neighbour. So we'd be, you know, if we're smart as councillors, we are looking for sensible planning reasons to turn down this application. And I believe the fact is that there are no sensible planning reasons to turn down this application. And were we to turn it down, then when it goes to appeal, the inspector will overrule us. So all we would be doing is making a gesture in this case. So I find myself in the very reluctant position of having to go with the officer recommendation, but it is with a heavy heart. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. I can't see anyone else wanting to speak. I've taken a sounding of the room and we are confused. I would like some just very final legal advice, Vicky, from you before we move to the vote, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I presume the Chair is going to ask you to vote on the officer recommendation. As usual, you are able to vote for it or against it. If members do vote against it, then we'll go on to have a discussion about the reasons for refusing it, and those being planning reasons, and I'll be asking the planning officers to speak to those. As members have gone around the room in terms of the comments, I don't think I've heard something that the officer will be able to really extract as a planning reason at the moment. That's not to say that there isn't a member who hasn't yet spoken that hasn't got a planning reason to come forward. It has been alluded to earlier, I think, by Councillor Price about a pub on, I think it was Sandygate Road, where it was refused by the committee, it went to appeal, and yes, costs were awarded against the City Council. Just to note that the matter of cost at appeal is not a material consideration for you to weigh up in the balance, but what is the material consideration here is whether there are any planning reasons or planning merits for turning it down, or any evidence that there is a planning reason or a planning merit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vicky. Right, so I'm going to ask you to vote on the officer recommendation, which is to grant the application that's sitting before you conditionally. I'm going to go around the room and ask you to indicate whether you support that recommendation, whether you're against that recommendation, or whether you abstain. Okay.
Does that include the new condition on the delivery times? Thank you.
Yeah, so it will be as amended, yeah, in this debate. Yes, thank you for reminding me of that. There's been quite a lot of plates to be keeping in the air in this particular item. So first of all, I'm going to call on Councillor Downing.
Against the officer recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Holmshaw.
Against the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Chaplin.
For the officer recommendation.
For the recommendation.
For.
It sticks in the throat, but I'll say 4. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Williams.
Yeah, I'll support the officers on this occasion.
Councillor Weatherall.
Yes, unfortunately, Chair, I've got to go with the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Davison.
Against the officer recommendation.
Councillor McCann.
Abstention, Laura.
And Councillor Woodcock.
Reluctantly for the officer recommendation, Chair.
I'm looking to Abby now. Okay, thank you very much. Abby's just said there are 6 for that application, 3 against it and 1 abstention. So I think reluctantly and with a heavy heart.
Chair, I think there were 7. 7 for, sorry, Abby, I think there were 7.
Hang on.
Diana's got 7 as well.
Sorry, 7, yeah. Sorry.
Oh, so 7 for, 3 against and 1 abstention. So I think for all of us, the heavy heart and with the point well made about yes, following the planning legislation when you're requesting demolitions, that application is granted with the amendments as agreed. Thank you. We have one final item of business today, and that is that I'm going to hand over to Lucy for. It's a record of the planning appeals, submissions and decisions, because I know she wants to talk it through with us.
Thank you, Chair. It's a bumper edition this time because obviously we didn't have a committee last time. So just to note, there were 16 appeals dismissed. I'll move on to one of those shortly, and there were just checking how many were allowed. There were 8 appeal decisions allowed. The vast majority, apart from 1, were delegated decisions, and I know it's always the ones that come to this committee that you'd prefer us to highlight. So if you look at page number 127, the report that's the second one in, if you remember, it was the case at 162 to 170 Devonshire Street, which by very on balance, officers had recommended approval, but it was very much on balance, and the inspector has overturned that decision and agreed with you, with councillors, that it should have been rejected, both for reasons of character and appearance, and also the impact on the amenity of the residents to the back and to the side. And obviously members of this committee went on the site visit at that time. So that's a victory for this committee, because you rejected something that was
It's okay. I was just going to ask for the meeting to come to order.
Chair, so obviously that's one that's important for members, and as I say, it was a very much on balance recommendation from us, but in those on balance cases it can certainly go the other way, and that's what the inspector decided. So members were correct in their judgment on that, in that case. So I just thought you'd like to hear that one.
That's a dangerous precedent to give to us after today, but thank you for that one, Lucy. So if we'd just like to note that report, thank you. And I'd just like to point out to you that we're now moved to the new cycle of meetings, whereby we're on the second Tuesday of the month. So that's, yeah. So the next meeting of this, there every month we're going to, because of the new committee system, it was almost impossible to fit a cycle of meetings in that went 3 weekly. So we're going to go to a monthly cycle, and the first meeting of that monthly cycle will be next, longer agendas, yeah, will be on Tuesday the 12th of July at 2 p.m. Thank you.
Diane, you mean sort of 12th of June, I believe? Oh.
Future meetings will be held on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. as follows. 12th of July. Ah, right, okay. Abby's saying she's not completed the list. We all thought we got away with one. Yeah, 14th of June is the next meeting then. Thank you.